Dev has
Okay.
joined the call, it looks like.
Hello, Dev. Oh,
Hello,
connecting to
hello.
audio. Hello, Dev.
I heard you, Dev. I don't know what happened.
Yeah, maybe I don't hear him actually.
Well, now
Nobody
I don't
hears
hear
him.
him. I don't know.
God damn it, Dev.
He's
Jesus
always doing
Christ.
this kind of stuff.
Jacob
He's
Lloyd for
always just
$10 says, legitimate question. In this new system, does the public get to decide on what I do with my 7 sheep and 21 chickens? On what level do private decisions get to be made?
Yeah, like I said, I mean, I think most socialists have a sole proprietorship exception. So if you just wanted to own a bunch of sheeps or whatever at your house, or you wanted to have a stove where you bake cakes or whatever, I don't think most people would have a huge problem with that under a socialist
Yeah,
framework.
but as soon
I
as you
certainly
hire
wouldn't.
someone to help you with your chickens, is that where the problem arises?
Again, I think in a my practical system includes all the flexibility that you guys are describing. So you'd still be able to hire employees and have like private businesses if you wanted. I don't, I have a hard time conceiving of what exactly, like you said, that's one of those practical problems that I would fully recognize that it's like, okay, you got like a guy who wants to, what, he wants to just hire some like day labor or something like that. It's like, is all of a sudden the government got to buy part of his farm or something like that? Like, I think all these practical problems are really worth, thinking about for sure. That's why I say that in my sort of practical incarnation of my system, there'd probably be limitations on how far you could push public ownership.
Mark Twain for $20 says, Econoboy, would you support removing residential construction from being applicable to the Davis-Bacon Act in order to make federal loans like HUD 221D more financially feasible, or are unions more important than housing?
Oh my God, that's a deep cut.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I don't know the exact regulation he's talking about. But I think it sounds like you're referring to the idea of union, like a lot of different contracting standards will require union labor or they'll incentivize union labor. I'm typically against those kind of things. I mean, I don't think the best way to incentivize unions is to basically give them favorable contracting standards. The best way to incentivize unions is just make it easy to form a union, which we don't do in this country, and we should do.
Someone asked, do you think the government should have used force to break up the Chaz and the Chop?
I don't know what are we talking about here? I
You
don't
know,
know.
remember during BLM, there were like these autonomous zones where Antifa far left people would like take over a couple of blocks of the city and they'd say, like, this is an autonomous zone of America. Do you think the government should have sent police in there to stop all that, reestablish order?
I mean, I probably is that not do we have autonomous governments in this country? I guess is that
No.
what currently?
Okay, so good. So you say, yeah, get rid of those, right?
Yeah, I mean, I
All
think
right.
obviously you should try to aim towards peaceful settlements, but if somebody's like, I don't like blockading the city or something and refuses to leave, I mean, you got to do something about it. So,
Gotcha.
Hi, by the way. What's going on?
Hello, Dev.
hey, Dev,
How's
what's
it
up, bud?
going? You guys
What's
have had quite the shit show. It's been really fun to watch.
This is not a shit show. I don't know
What
what
is
you're
a
talking
shit
about.
show? What are you talking about?
It's been
It's just
mostly
been a lot of fun.
productive,
It's been a
I
lot of
would
fun.
say.
I've enjoyed the stream.
I
It's
think
really
I think
fun.
the original I think the conversation with Destiny and Connor Pisco was like 100 times more shit show than anything happened
That's
here.
true. Yes. Yes, that's true. You guys all
So
took
what
some
did you want to
Prozac today or
ask?
something.
What did
Oh,
you
oh
want? You kept pestering to come on.
I only pestered like
I
twice.
know, I'm just teasing you. I'm just teasing you.
um, I guess just real quick, since you guys were just talking about it, Econoboy, since you don't know about it, the Chaz was basically, I think it was like 6 city blocks in Seattle that some far left goons took over and declared independence from America for about a month. And the city government was like, "Oh, it's no big deal. Everyone's just this is a radical new experiment in how to run our society." And then after a month of this shit and like 5 people died, they finally cracked down on it. It was kind of an embarrassment, to be honest, for the Democrats back in 2020. I'm surprised you didn't know about it.
Um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I mean, I've always had views like when there's like that Colorado City like cult leader situation that happens where it's like they kind of took over an entire county and the government just kind of didn't do anything about it. It's like why aren't we doing something about that? You know, that seems pretty crazy to me. So I don't know. I guess the government generally is like very scared of like Waco like situations, which is understandable. That's why I said, you should always try to, do as peaceful a solution as possible. But, if you have a situation where people are like, abusing kids or something. You probably have to do something extreme at that point.
Yep. Okay, so just so you know that I know what you're saying because I have read the Substack now. I read it twice actually at this point. So you're talking about sovereign wealth funds and publicly owned companies that buy up stocks in private companies, and then basically through an incremental process, the government ends up owning, you said between 60 and 80% of the means of production.
Yeah, sure, let's go with that.
Okay. Firstly, why 60 to 80%? Like, why is that your goal?
I think that's just the realistic target that I could imagine working out decently well. We have about 75% institutional ownership of the stock market right now, and we don't seem to have huge liquidity problems or allocative inefficiencies in the stock market. Insofar as we do have allocative inefficiencies, it's not because of the institutional investors at the very least. And so I figured, if we essentially took over that institutional management at about 75%, I think, something like that could make sense. And then that's just a business capital, but obviously we would have a diverse portfolio of more than just that when it came to wealth. And so that's the part of wealth that I guess I'm most concerned with. The allocative inefficiencies is the business capital. So I think 75% of the stock market is probably, you could probably
Okay.
get up to that.
This basically sounds like BlackRock, Vanguard, etc., but publicly owned and not
Yeah,
client owned.
that's
Okay.
one way to think of it.
Um, so you said there's going to be a whole bunch of public holding companies. Why would they compete against each other if they're all state owned?
They're just that's just what their mandate is. I use the example of there's a lot of portfolio investors and strategies where you don't invest in one company, you just invest in a whole bunch of companies in the same industry. So most people that want to have exposure to oil, for instance, they would buy stock in like many different oil companies, and a lot of companies or a lot of institutional investors and investors in general do this, and the companies still compete against each other, and the investors still compete against each other. One example that I have is, which I think is pretty interesting, is that BlackRock is publicly traded, and about 10% of their stock, which is just the largest single owner, at least the last I checked the data, about 10% of BlackRock is owned by Vanguard. So, like, literally,
Yes.
Vanguard owns part of their own competitor, but they still compete against each other. And it seems like the reason why that is because Vanguard invests in BlackRock, not necessarily because they want to capture market share, but because they're just doing diversified investing. And so, insofar as the mandate is that they compete against each other, and that's how they're compensated, and they have this like understanding of maximizing value with like good portfolio theory, kind of like finance fundamentals, then that's what we would expect them to happen. That's what we would expect them to do.
When you just said that there'd be a mandate that they compete against each other and they'd be compensated for it. What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, I think the compensation structure for the investment managers would be at least like what I would advocate for would be that it would be fundamentally similar to the compensation structures that we see today. You'd have like performance pay and you'd have bonuses for maximizing value and for certain return thresholds, things like that, and so they would be incentivized not to, engage in this kind of like coordination. And also there'd be antitrust measures and things like that, kind of monitoring them and making sure, just like we have in today's society. So there would just be a lot of incentives and there'd be a lot of regulations that would make it the case that they would compete, just like how we have those incentives and regulations today.
Yeah, because I was thinking initially, as soon as I was reading this, I was thinking monopoly, right? Because if you have a whole bunch of these holding companies and they're all competing against each other, it wouldn't be hard for them to just sort of rig the game in their favor by all collaborating with each other. So you get like it's not quite a monopoly. It's like a monopoly type situation where each of these people they say, "Oh, we're just gonna, I'm not gonna, push on you too hard. You're not gonna push on me too hard, and we'll just." Maintain the system as it is. Like when you say antitrust, I can see that working against private corporations, but these aren't private corporations; they're public ones. You're expecting basically an arm of the government to regulate these things despite the government owning them.
Yeah, I mean, like for instance, in Norway, they have the state oil company, but they also have an adversarial regulator, right? So they have, the state oil company is expected to follow like all the same regulations that the other companies are expected to follow. And insofar as they don't, they get fined or they have some haranguing, obviously, from the government. And so, I would just that's like what I would advocate for is a neutral set of regulations. And so if there's evidence that one holding corporation is anti uncompetitively basically coordinating with the other ones outside of a literal transaction. I mean, if two holding corporations wanted to, there was some kind of merger that would happen, that'd be fine. But if it was anti-competitive in that sense, then it would be, against the rules, I guess, similar how it's against the rules today.
I mean, sure, but if you look at the states right now, you have, I think, the Federal Reserve is like a semi-independent. It's somewhat isolated from the powers of the presidency, and yet Trump is still kind of pushing on it, right? Like, and it's a big controversy right now. What Trump is trying to get rid of the Fed head, and he's not really allowed to, but he's still trying to do it. You know the story, right?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it's just that it really seems like the system that you're setting up, it's ripe. It's just ripe for abuse by the wrong leader to come in.
Yeah, yeah. I think if you do set up the system to be particularly vulnerable, right? So if you don't set up these independent governing frameworks like I talked about, it's much more vulnerable than if you do. If you do set up all of these like really good, solid, like, oh, we got all these rules-based systems by which these people are getting appointed, and let's say it works for a long time, but now you've got this like radical government that takes office that wants to do some crazy shit with the public wealth. Like, I fully concede, that's something that could happen. I would just argue that we've had crazy governments in the past who have tried to do crazy shit with the economy, and sometimes they do, right? And those people are typically voted out and replaced with people who are more competent managers. And I will say that with regards to public wealth specifically, that's one of the arguments that they make in the Public Wealth of Nations book is that there's like a it seems like with public wealth, if you set up the institutions right, the political economy is really strong. That, hey, because we set the institutions up right, they make a lot of money for the government. And because they make a lot of money for the government doesn't have to raise taxes as much. And because the government doesn't have to raise taxes as much, well, it's kind of incentivized to just let things keep going how they're going, right? So that's another reason why it's really important to set up these institutions properly.
So I get all that, but I know that Adam, you're going to disagree with me on this. I understand, but I keep pointing back to Trump as the ultimate counterexample because, like, America has its problems, but it's been set up pretty well. And then Trump, being the bull in the china shop that he is, he constantly just runs things down. He pulls institutions apart. America has tons of problems right now, and they are at least in part predicated on the idea of, well, he can't be that bad,
Dev,
and
you
surely
you don't
surely things will survive. And it's like, well, they might not, you
you
know?
Well,
don't
right, but
you
if
don't
you
I
need
don't know.
can,
Trump, Dev. You don't need Trump to make this argument. Like a huge, if 80% of the wealth is held publicly, that wealth is only accessible through politics. That's a huge chunk of everybody's wealth that they don't have access to without some sort of political process.
well, again,
My-
I think that if that were
oh,
the
go ahead.
again, like if that were the case, the political economy is really important here, right? That if it were the case that people were voting politicians in that would manage this like huge pot of collective wealth, and we see this in other countries that have these huge pots of collective wealth, um, that seems to be internalized in how a lot of people vote. That people are incentivized to vote for politicians that will openly say, "Look, I'm not going to fuck with this system because I understand how good it is." Like Dev in Canada, you see the same thing with your healthcare system. Like so many politicians, maybe some of them are pretending, maybe they have to feign this kind of position, but at the very least, like the Medicare system in Canada has such a strong political economy that for the most part, they can make changes on the margin, but you're not going to see like a party become, a majority government in Canada running on completely fucking up the Medicare system, right? Even in the United States, right? Trump didn't cut Medicare and he pledged not to cut Medicare because the political economy of Medicare is so strong. And so I would just make the argument, and this is, I think, based on other historical examples, obviously it's conjecture because we don't know how the future would go, but I would just make the argument that the institutions that I describe have a very strong political economy, and that we wouldn't have a lot of reason to believe that uh, basically the economy would collapse.
Okay. I mean, it sounds like if for your changes to have a shot at working, there need to be a massive cultural shift in the United States regarding how Americans view their relationship with their own government, basically.
Maybe. I mean, I think ultimately, I think again, you can start small. Like these institutions can start pretty small, right? So you could start like one holding corporation with $50 billion, and then it's like, oh shit, like hey, like it turned into $100 billion, and that worked out pretty well. Like and then you can start more of them from there. Or, like you could accumulate capital in a sovereign wealth fund. Oh shit, we've got like a $10 trillion sovereign wealth fund, right? Like that's pretty nice chunk of change at this point. And like I think eventually people kind of incrementally, as the incremental kind of reform takes hold, kind of form that understanding.
Okay. See, this you and I have had this conversation not on stream recently, where I basically said something along the lines of what your I don't view your positions as inherently socialist, and I don't think that liberalism and socialism they work together the way that you think that they do. And I'll give you my reason why. It's a little bit different than Adam and Sitch's. One of the core liberal values is restriction on state power. If you look at any liberal political philosopher, they talk all about you have these massive authoritarian states. I know that you're not. I'm not going to make the claim that you're advocating for this. I heard that conversation 10,000 times today already. I'm not making the claim that you advocate for an authoritarian state, but one of liberalism's prime concerns is that the government might get too strong and might oppress the people because the first liberals were writing in an era when that was very common with all the monarchies in Europe. And you would need a massive expansion of government power to do what you want to do, which I do think is fundamentally anti-liberal.
Yeah, I guess I disagree in part. Like, I think that you find a lot of liberal thinkers who expected a lot out of their government. Thomas Paine, for instance, he was a foundational liberal thinker in this country. He's taught in our history classes, of course. He advocated for things like universal inheritance and basic income and stuff like that. That was, on the government's obviously their responsibility to do. And I think that you find, for instance, like John Rawls, who I'm sure you would agree is kind of in a contemporary sense, like probably one of the most foundational contemporary liberal philosophers. He thought the government should do a shitload of things. Like he thought the government should provide for so many different sorts of rights and welfare systems. And he said that although at the end of his life it's kind of controversial whether you would call him a socialist, he did at the very least say that look, my liberal ideals of justice are achieved by democratic socialism, by a democratic socialist government. And so I think these people were in fact committed liberals, but they were liberals who believed that one of the ways to achieve their ideas of liberal freedom was through having a democratic state that did things like I'm describing, engaged in collectivization projects and engaged in welfare redistribution. Or in the case of John Rawls, just like literally did socialism. Like he said that socialism would be a way to achieve his kind of liberal ideals. So it's liberalisms, which you would agree with. And I just happen to be on the I guess pro-government side of liberalism.
I mean, I think there's a lot of good faith discussions to have on, how much should the government interfere in the private sector? How much should the government spend on like public health care or something like that? But I think most people who call themselves liberals, in good faith, call themselves liberals, they would not say something like 80% of the means of production. That's really high.
Yeah. Well, that's probably, I wouldn't, yeah, probably that is true. Most liberals are not socialists, I would say.
Well, right, but the amount of state expansion you'd have to implement to get to that 80% number is more than what liberals would be comfortable with, which is why I don't think that you can be a liberal and a socialist at the same time.
Well, I mean,
It's
again,
like
it
I
sounds,
don't know. I don't know. Just real
well, it
quick.
sounds like
I don't know.
you didn't disagree with my history. Like all those liberal thinkers seems to endorse an expansive role of the state, right? And I mean, insofar as we want to just say, well, but they were a minority of liberals. Maybe I don't have I don't, maybe that's true. Like I don't have a survey available to me. I'm just saying that they were part of the liberal tradition. In the case of John Rawls, a very pivotal part of contemporary liberalism. And, um, they endorsed expansive roles for the government. I mean, many, people that in this society, people today who call themselves liberal, like just like in a common parlance, like liberals in America vote for the Democrats, and that's the party of big government, right? So obviously, if we're talking in a more pure philosophical sense, maybe not, but if we're saying like, well, most liberals would say this, it's like most liberals in this country vote for the Democrats, so.
Well, to be honest, I don't think Americans understand what liberals or conservatives are generally because I don't
Yeah,
know. Like
probably
there's
true.
people
Yeah.
there's people who think that liberals are communists, people who think that conservatives are fascists in the United States, and it's like, no, guys, these labels have meanings. I don't I don't like using the American definitions of these words because
Yeah,
I don't think
but I'm saying
Americans.
even if you think of actual like philosophical proper liberals, John
Mhm.
Rawls, Thomas Paine, people like this, they there is a tradition of liberalism, which is one that believes that the best way to expand liberal freedoms is through things like public ownership and state and welfare. And even like a guy like I said, like a guy like John Rawls even endorsed socialism as a system by which he didn't necessarily endorse the system. He believed in property owning democracy, but he did endorse at the very least, like as an option for his liberal ideals was democratic socialism. You can say that's an idiosyncratic view and that that's a minority view. Maybe that's true, but I don't think it's true that I think a survey of liberal history would include people at least like a couple of slides on people who believed in an expansive role for the government.
Okay, where would you personally put the switch being flipped then? All right, so like would it be like 50%? If the government owns 50% of the means of production, now it moves into now we can rightfully call it a socialist government. And if it's 49%, it's not like
Yeah,
I'm not.
I don't on the binary. I don't know. I guess I typically would speak in relative terms. So if an economy is like if most of the GDP comes from the collectively owned entities, I would say well you got a mostly socialist economy right there. The actual binary classification, I don't know. I mean, you could I say in my article, is this socialism was the question I asked myself, and I basically say that look, I mean, if we could get to a scenario where 85-90% of the wealth is collectively owned. I mean, if you got an 85 or 90% on a test, usually that's considered a passing grade, So probably at a certain intuitive point, you just call it socialism flat out. But hard to say at what point.
You,
Okay.
you are saying that 90%, if you're at that point, 90% of the wealth in America is collectively owned. People can only access that wealth through the political process, through the government dispensing some sort of check to them. Correct? Like
Yeah,
how do they have
the
access to wealth beyond that?
well, the fruits of that wealth would be distributed through a democratic process through the government, right? So you'd vote for the government, and they would do something with the money, obviously. In terms of meaningful access, I mean, there's I don't know. I don't think that we would typically think of ownership in quite that way. Like, for instance, if you were to have like a trust fund, oh, you have a trust fund and it's going to pay out a certain amount of money every single year to you. But it's like an inheritance trust fund. I would think that would still be considered ownership, even though it's like in this kind of
Yeah,
trust
but you wouldn't
system.
have access to it. That's the whole point of a trust fund. You get access to it at a certain age, or you get access to a certain amount of it at certain times.
Well, even if it's paid, I'm saying like even if it's like this, even if the stock is held and you're only paid out dividends from the
Right.
stock of wealth, I think that'd still be considered ownership or like wealth accumulation in some sense. And collective ownership is not quite the same
Well,
thing as individual ownership,
if you're
but
making
it's
if you're getting the dividends, yes. But if the sovereign wealth fund is getting the dividends, I mean that's the biggest problem I see with this because I mean, obviously, individual investors own a lot of wealth in the stock market, but in this situation, a lot of that wealth would be being bought by the United States government. So the investors would own the public would own a smaller and smaller share of that as individual investors.
yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, I agree with your characterization, Adam. I agree that the the public wealth that exists in society that's owned collectively is owned and controlled in a democratic fashion. But I guess most socialists would say that that's a feature, not a bug. I mean, that's what makes the wealth ownership horizontal, that we all have an equal say in how to manage that wealth and what to do with the fruits of that wealth. And obviously, you'd say that's bad, but I think that's a
Well,
good thing.
I just think it's technically, I mean, it puts us at the whims of the political process, which, I mean, you can have wealth accumulation outside of the political process in America, obviously. If you want to start a business, build a business, and build wealth that way, you don't have to be a part of the political process at all, right?
Yeah, people obviously, yeah, most that's what I already said. The top 10% of individuals own 67% of the wealth. I mean, you can individually accumulate wealth. Of course you can, right? But the dynamic of capitalism and private ownership is such that that wealth concentrates to a pretty radical degree to, we see this in every society that has, capitalist markets, that, capitalist markets are good at creative destruction, innovation, things like that because of market competition, the profit motive, things like that. But because of private ownership of that process, we see the wealth is extremely concentrated, right?
Yeah, it
Um,
totally accumulates. I agree.
right.
Yeah, but if the government owns 90% of the wealth and they're doling it out through a political process, isn't that going to be a highly demotivating thing for people to enter into private business, to start businesses, to even work? Because they're not going to have access to any of that.
No, I mean, we go back to the example of the shoe shop owner, right? So in my system, the shoe shop owner, he can, he wants to start a business. Like, how does he do that? Well, he has to convince
Why?
people. Why what? What are you
Why does he
asking?
want
Why
to
start
start
a
a
business?
business if the government owns 90% of the wealth?
Because he still can own and control his business and his business's wealth, right? So he, again, my system, my practical incarnation doesn't abolish the private ownership of wealth, right? That I do think I've said this 100 times now, that there's a lot of practical considerations to think about. But when it comes to the individual dynamics, like the reason why the wealth accumulates on the public side is just because the public is making investments, right? Like rich people like it when you make investments for the most part. Now, when a business owner says, "I want to start a new business in a Conoboy system," he has all the same incentives, right? He maximizes profits, he can accumulate capital, he can, change the business how he wants. If he goes public, that's a choice that he can make, and he can retain as much of the shares as he wants, because you can list whatever proportion you want. If you only want to list 30% of your shares and you want to keep the other 70, you can do that, right? So you have all the same incentives in my system.
Those 30% of the shares are going to go to the government, though, right? Because they're the ones that are controlling the sovereign wealth and doing most of the investing.
Well, it's gonna go to just anybody who's interested in the IPO. So that could be a lot of retail investors. It could be, like you said, a lot of the institutional public investors, right? It could just be wealthy, individuals who just have a lot of money hanging around that they want to, oh, I want to buy 5% of this company because I think it's a good value. It's a stock
Well,
market. Anybody can buy the
yeah,
stock.
80% of the money in that market, though, is going to be controlled by the government. By necessity, if you're saying that the government controls 80% of the wealth, they control 80% of the assets and currency.
Right. So, for instance, 75% of our stock market is already owned by institutional investors, right? So the concentration isn't, I don't think, allocatively a problem. You
Well,
can make
they're
you can make
they're
arguments that my
private
system,
institutions, though, right? Correct, like
yeah, that's what
privately
I'm
owned
saying.
institutions.
Yeah. Right.
Right, but
So again,
everyone's motivated to be involved in the markets to get their piece of the pie. And I'm
right.
struggling here to understand if 90% of that wealth is doled out through a government program. It just seems like why would I work at all? Unless you're going to be highly restrictive with this, what you're doling
Well,
out.
you would work because capital income doesn't. It's not all income. 2/3 of income is labor income, not capital income. So you'd still be incentivized to work. With regard to why would I be incentivized to still start a business? Again, it's because you have all the same incentives to start a business as you do now, right? You'd still be able to start a business, make profits. If you don't want to sell it to institutional investors that are public or private or other private investors, you don't have to, similar to how you don't have to do that now. However, if you want to raise a bunch of equity capital, well, you've got to be willing to sell part of your ownership to raise equity capital. If you don't want to raise
So,
equity capital and you just want to do fixed income, or you want to charge royalties or something like that, you can do that too, right? I mean,
so
you
we
can
could
have all the
have like
same.
you could have a system where there's all these businesses that they go public. The government buys 49% of the shares. The rest of the 1% of the shares is owned by, the board of the company and the CEO and high level people in the company, right? And they would not be co-ops, they'd be run the same way as capitalist companies. And you're saying that would be the system?
That could be the system for an individual institution, right? So again, if somebody says I'm gonna go public, but I only want to
Wouldn't they all
list
do that?
49% of my shares, then they don't have to do that. Well, they wouldn't all do that because, again, like, a lot of people just want to make money, right? So it's like, oh, I'm gonna list 90% of my shares because I just want to I want to cash in.
I mean, they don't want.
That's what
Yeah,
an
but they usually
IPO
people don't want to give up
process is.
controlling interest to a
Doesn't
company that they create.
That's not true. That's
How
not
does
true.
that
I mean,
stop?
Unless they're just selling out and they just want to,
a lot of people do that. Like
get away from it.
Yeah,
Bezos
they
only
sell it a
I
lot,
think
yeah.
Bezos owns like 15% of Amazon. Like he doesn't own even close to a majority of Amazon, and the Walton family doesn't own a majority of Walmart.
Does someone own 16% of Amazon?
Does
If an
someone
activist
own?
investor got involved and started buying up shares, that's how they would
I'm saying like
get a
can
seat on
some
the board.
yeah, because you're saying
get
yeah,
some
Jeff
sort of
Bezos owns
controlling
15%,
share.
but that's because he's like that there's a bunch of other people that own shares. Does anyone own more
Right.
shares than Jeff Bezos of Amazon?
No.
Well,
Okay. So,
but
but
you
that's
mentioned
the
controlling
difference.
interest, right?
Yeah.
Well,
That's what I'm talking
so
about. Yeah.
By definition.
so it would still be a liquid market, right? So if you, for instance, if you wanted to buy, they'd still be listing the share, like, because again, these holding corporations are engaged in an entrepreneurial activity, right? So they'd be buying the shares, selling them as well. They'd be holding them for like short and medium and long term investment. So, for instance, if you were like a big owner of a company, and like let's say the holding corporations, like all the different holding corporations, own 70% of your company on the public stock market. Number one, you made the choice to list the shares that way, right? So you made that choice, and you can control that choice if you want. Number two, let's say that you're like, you know what, I think I want to take this company back private. I think that these public shareholders are fucking everything up, and you do see a lot of founders. Elon Musk did this. Tried to do this with Tesla, for instance. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to take it private again, so I can fully control what goes on in this company. You just buy a majority of the shares. You just buy back the shares at the strike price. You could do that at any time if you wanted.
If the government will sell them. How does this avoid the concentration of wealth? Because obviously if you go to your example of the shoe store guy, he starts a mom and pop shoe store, he builds it up, he franchises, he ends up going public. He sells 30% of his shares to the government and cashes out. He's still fabulously wealthy. I guess the only thing he can really invest, well, no, he can invest the same way, according to you, right? He can buy shares in
Right.
other companies and whatnot.
Yeah.
So how's it stop the concentration of wealth? How's it going to stop Elon Musk from still being?
Yeah, two main mechanisms by which the public capital kind of accumulates faster than the private capital. Number one is you've got principal investments on the side of the public. So every time you capitalize a new holding corporation, or you further capitalize a sovereign wealth fund, that's like, you're sort of necessarily taking private capital and making it public, because you're taking tax money and things like this, and then using that and saying go out and buy part of the market for the public. So that's one way. Another way is that throughout the process of the voluntary transaction, if let's say that a guy lists whatever.
So you're
50
taxing, just to be clear, you're taxing the guy, the shoe store guy. He just sold you 30% of the stock in his company, and you're coming by and you're taxing him, and then you're using that to make a capital investment on another company.
Yeah, we'd still have taxes in my system, of course. Yeah, you'd still pay taxes. Now I believe in a hyper efficient tax code, right? So I believe in basically only taxing consumption and not investment. But the second thing that I was going to say, the caveat is like why the capital in the public accumulates in my system, and it doesn't just get out, eaten by the private investors, is because when a private investor, a lot aggregately speaking, when private investors sell their ownership to other investors, they don't use all that money for investment. They take a lot of that money and just consume it, right? They buy cars and houses and all this other shit, right? And so
Sure.
That's money that's not necessarily accumulating capital. And so those are the two main ways and you see this in other societies that really invest in their public wealth, that the private investment, it's not that private investment and private capitalization doesn't exist. It's just outstripped by public investment because, I don't know, the public just puts a lot of principal investment into it. And when you buy out the wealthy's shares, they consume a lot of it. And so the capital from the wealthy doesn't accumulate when they purchase basic consumption items.
See, yeah, this is something that I've been thinking about as well, because so let's say we're starting the Econoboy system up. Okay, you're gonna
Econoboy with
need
socialism character. No, socialism with Econoboy characteristics. Deb, please. Proper name.
Econo-socialism. How about that?
Economism. Yeah.
So we're starting it up, and you need initially you need to actually create these public holding companies. So you're going to probably be building them up using tax dollars. So that might be way more taxes than people want to pay, basically. But okay, you build them up, and then you
Hmm.
have these companies buying stock in other private companies until they start to get a controlling amount in those private companies. And but then when they reinvest, so okay, maybe I'm just too stupid to get it, but like from what I understand, when you buy stock in a company and then the company does well, the value of the stock goes up. You sell the stock and you get a profit. It sounds like for the government to actually be able to enjoy any of the collective wealth, it would also have to be selling stock as well. And if they're not selling it to someone who's a private owner, where's the money coming from?
Yeah, so it's
Good
a
question.
combination. Yeah, it's a combination of things. So, for instance, I think that number one, these holding corporations would have a dividend policy. So, they would have like probably loose dividend guidance to where they would just like directly pay a dividend each quarter or each month or however they would do it.
To who?
And
The
so
sovereign wealth fund? Who gets the dividend?
to the treasury, to the public
Okay.
treasury, the people, the owners. And then obviously the government does whatever they want with that money. Now you could also have a fiscal rule, which is kind of what you're describing, where you have like actual capital gains, where part of the portfolio is sold. So the question is, okay, well, who buy? Like, if you just tell like the holding corporations to sell their stock, well, who the fuck's going to buy it when basically like the very same entities basically dominate the market? Well, the answer is proportionally those same exact entities, right? Because these are entities with hard budget constraints. So it would be a bunch of other private investors, and it would be the other holding corporations, which would want to essentially repurchase other stocks that are now in the open market. That's part of what I think. That's part of why I think that you'd have like this limitation on, um, essentially like the upper limit on how much public ownership you could have. Like I say, 75-80% or something like that on the stock market, because you do need some kind of external liquidity and retail investors and like private investors that are able to purchase stock when it's sold on a fiscal rule in order, like you said, Dev, to capture capital gains for people. But I guess it's also possible that if you have a situation where um, the state basically owns like almost all of the stock market, I guess, like maybe you don't even, you could make the argument that you don't even need the fiscal rule at that point because the dividend payments are good enough. Like it's just like straight cash, injection at that point. You don't need the capital gains, but I don't
Wait,
know.
where are
I'm not
the
as
I'm confused. Are the dividends coming from the private company's profits?
yeah. So each of these companies would have a dividend policy for its holding corp that it owns. So similar to how like Amazon has, a dividend. A lot of companies don't pay a dividend. A lot of companies do. Those dividends would trickle up to the holding corporations, and then the holding corporations would make the decision about, okay, well, we got all these dividend payments, we got all of our own capital gains. That's our balance sheet basically that we've built. And we've got this guidance from our owners. So what do we do with this money that we have now? Like we've got this guidance where we need to pay a dividend to our owners, which is the public in this case. We want to
No,
make
right.
some
I understand that
reinvestments.
aspect. I guess what I'm asking is in the system you're talking about, would it be set up so that if a company goes private, that they automatically have to pay dividends to the government, which would then turn around and distribute those dividends to the people or through social programs? That's
No,
what
no, no.
is that the system?
The dividend policy would be dictated by the boards at each company, right? And so if you were to have a private company and you were to own most of that company, well, you're the one who's basically deciding who's on the board, and so the board kind of is probably going to whatever dividend policy you want is probably what the board's going to decide. Just like how it works in our current system.
Right, but
Okay,
so
so
if
hold on,
if all the
just real quick,
companies
Sitch.
went 51% or they went public and they can retain 51% of the shares, so the government would get zero dividends because they don't have 49% ownership, right?
Well, no, they would get the dividends in proportion to just whatever the dividends that are paid out. So the 51% of shareholders would still want dividend payments, right? Like the shareholders want you to pay them
Well, I
dividends,
mean,
right?
a
And
lot of companies don't have dividends.
well, right, but then insofar as a company doesn't pay an actual dividend, you still have the capital gain associated with the stock as
No, but
well. So I mean,
Dev's question was like, if the government owns 80-90% of the stock, it seems like how are they ever going to make, they can't sell that off. Who are they going
well,
to sell
but
it off to?
so these are so right. So these are two kind of these are two different scenarios, right? If the government owns 75 to 80% of the stock, well, then, they have 75 to 80% of the controlling interest in these companies, right? And obviously that's not totally proportional, but you get what I'm saying. And so if that's the case, then the government's dividend guidance becomes essentially binding to those companies at that point. Now, in the case that like you're describing, where okay, well the government's only at like 40% ownership,
Well, no,
and
wait.
they
Just to be clear, when I said 75, 8%, I meant using what you're saying that the government owns 80% of like the entire market, not necessarily 80% of an individual company.
right, yeah, that's what I'm saying. So you're stuck in a rock and a hard place essentially. So either the government owns 80% of the market, in which case the dividend guidance that they give is binding, so the dividends trickle up to the state, or they own a much smaller minority into where they only own we only own 49% of every company, just as a kind of bizarre hypothetical.
Mhm.
Well, the majority shareholders are still in large part, and we see this today, incentivized to pay out dividends to shareholders. Like a lot of there's a lot of dividend payments that get paid because those other shareholders want dividends to be paid out. They eventually want to, capitalize. They eventually want like capital gains or returns to their capital at some point. So either through dividends or through things like capital gains income. And so you're still incentivized as a shareholder, even if the government is only 49% owner, to provide capital gains or dividends to the people that own your shares.
Okay, so if I was going to describe this using socialist language, it would be that the surplus value that is extracted from the workers of a company, rather than going to the CEO of the company or the owner of the company, instead it goes into the collective dividend fund of the holding company, and then the government looks at that holding fund, that maybe it becomes part of the sovereign wealth fund or something, that there's a big pot of money that's been extracted from all these workers, and then you have various political parties that'll say we're going to spend it on this social program, and then another party will say we're going to spend it on this one instead, and then you can vote, and whichever party gets into power can spend that pot how they like.
Yep.
Okay, I think I understand.
Yep. Well, guys, it's kind of late for me, and we've been going for a little while. Are there any other chat or
Yeah,
questions? I
read
think it's been
JMac's super chat before he leaves.
Yes. Thanks so much. Our surrogate father, Daddy J-Mac, with the $400. Thank you so much
that's a lot.
for $400 super chat. J-Mac says, the problem with trying to have a reasonable conversation with people like this is people with a liberal mindset should find his claim, quote, ideal society to be antithetical to our accepted idea of private rights. The fact that he can express these policies that are contradictory to liberalism and some just shrug speaks volumes.
Well, we addressed that point in the conversation, our conceptions of freedom. So I won't repeat myself, but anyway, it's been a great conversation. No, I do. We got heated at certain points, but this was definitely pretty productive, guys. And thanks so much for inviting me on. It was fun talking, and yeah, no, just overall, I thought it was an overall pretty good conversation, guys.
Yeah, thanks
Thanks
for
for
coming
coming
on.
on. Yeah.
All right, bye, guys.
Take care.
See ya. Wow.
It was a good conversation until Dev came on and ruined it.
I'm sorry.
I'm just kidding.
I have a feeling at the end there, I asked him a few questions that might have helped shine some light on what he's going for, you know?
I still don't understand how, if the government owns 80% of the market, they're going to make money. I think that was a good question that you asked. So, how do you feel about the claim that he was making that like he thinks the majority of socialists in America are moderate and not that the online socialists are not indicative of the moderate socialist out there in America land. How do you feel about that?
Um, I don't think there's enough of a socialist base in America to make a claim like that. There's just not that many socialists in the
Well, no,
States, I
he was
think.
saying that like if 5% of Americans are socialist, he thinks that the online socialist movement is not representative of the views of that 5%. And I'm saying I think that's a
I did.
ridiculous claim. I don't know how you'd make that claim based purely on the fact that those people would vote for Democrats.
I mean, to be honest, I'm not an American, but I'm gonna assume that it's similar
Well, you
enough
talk
in
about American
Canada.
politics.
Yeah. But like in real life, when I do encounter people that are political and that we could call socialists,
Mhm.
they're more leaning in the anarchist side of it than they are in the like tanky side of it, for sure.
Oh, I mean,
The
that's not
tankies
much
seem to be
better.
pretty rare.
But
No, it's
okay.
not. But the tankies seem to be pretty rare, in
Right,
my
right,
view.
right.
Yeah,
Okay,
my
interesting.
my big critique of what he was doing is that
Hmm.
one, it doesn't really sound like socialism or anything that I would call socialism. But that's just a labels argument. Like maybe we shouldn't be normalizing the label socialist because of what gets attached to it. I understand
Right.
that argument too. But in terms of the actual plan itself, like how feasible is this plan? If you have companies that are increasingly more and more owned by the government, even if it's not done through violent means, the government just buys these companies, right? Well, one, you need a lot more taxes to buy these companies, which is going to be a lot more of a squeeze on the average person. Because the government is now spending way more than it would be otherwise to buy all of these companies.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like you said, if you're going to be selling off parts of these companies to get capital gains, who do you sell them to? It has to be back to the private sector, or else
Right.
there's no money being generated. And he even admitted that in the conversation. And then the other way to do it is dividends. And that's why my final conversation was, so you're just taking the value from the workers of each individual company and then pushing that up into the dividend pot and then spreading it out across society, which he basically at the end just said a blanket, yes, that's what I'm doing. And it's like, well, okay, I get that. But that's just way more complication and red tape to get just taxes. Like it's the same thing that's happening with taxing like
Right.
income tax, but there's way more bureaucracy to go along with it now.
Well, if you had a situation, because again, like if this situation he was talking about existed, I do think you'd have what would happen would be every company that went public would maintain 51% of its shares because they don't want the government to have control over the board. And the government only be able to own 49% or less, because I guess there'd be 10 to 20% of private ownership, maybe. Um, and then you're right, because then if that's the situation, if the government just owns, 30 to 40% of every company through stock, isn't, and then they only make money through dividends, is that not the same as just saying we're going to put a blanket tax on all corporate profits? Like, how is that substantially different?
Yeah,
Well, they have
it
a
seems to be the
huge
same. Yeah,
say in how the business is run. Obviously, they're a 30% shareholder. They might be the largest stakeholder. That's a huge difference.
No,
that's
right. But
true.
I'm
That
saying
is a
like
difference. Yeah.
if the majority stake owner is still the company, right?
Sure, but
Like from the
look,
economic
30% is a huge
perspective.
stakeholder. If some activist investor accumulates 30% of stock in a company, they're going to want to see it on the board. They're going to be like,
Yeah,
"Holy
but
shit."
here's what I say the difference would be. If it's some kind of I think this whole system would like really fuck up and make asset prices very bizarre because you'd have the like there's like nothing for private people to invest in at this point.
Yes, that's the big problem
And
right
right,
there.
so like asset prices would be like hyper inflated. So you either have a situation where the government would just have to completely go into super inflation debt mode to print money to buy all these assets to maintain their market share. And then even then, if you're like, if I'm Jeff Bezos and I own 51% of Amazon and the government owns 49%, and they start to making demands, I'll just tell them to pound sand. I don't give a fuck what they do. Go sell some shares. There's like an entire population of the earth is clamoring to buy them that you're hogging. Like
Who
there's
doesn't
no
that
there's no reason.
population doesn't have any money to invest in shares in this system.
Well, maybe I guess maybe that's the problem. Yeah.
Yeah, they only get money when the government doles it out from the sovereign wealth fund.
Okay. Wow. That's
I
a
mean,
very,
like
it's a very
I'm not
strange
even against the
system.
idea of sovereign wealth funds. They have worked well in multiple
Yeah,
countries.
and
I
a much
just
smaller scale, not like owning 80% of all the wealth that the country
of
produces.
the entire economy. Yeah,
Yes,
that
like
seems to be a
that's
bit much.
yeah, I agree with the concept of sovereign wealth fund. Fucking Trump agrees with the concept of sovereign wealth funds, but like not they're on a much smaller scale.
But look at already how Trump is talking about allocating the funds of the sovereign wealth fund.
I know
He
he wants
wants
to
to
buy
buy
crypto.
Bitcoin. Why do you think he wants to
Yes.
buy Bitcoin? Because a bunch of his supporters own Bitcoin and it'll make the value go up.
What are
You
the
don't think that's going to
odds?
happen? You
Yes,
don't think that's
100%.
exactly what's going to happen with the sovereign wealth fund?
100%. What are the odds you think that if Trump does create some sovereign wealth fund that they're going to try to buy Trump coin or Melania coin with that?
We're going to tune in too. Econoboy is still live, probably
Okay.
talking mad fucking shit. I have it in
There
the watch together. I sent you a link, Dev. So
there was an
Okay,
interesting
we've already
there was
got
an
Josiah complaining in the super chats,
I don't know.
whining.
Okay, that's
I'll
fine.
grab it real quick.
There was an
I think.
interesting
Go ahead. Go
Just
ahead.
go ahead.
oh, I don't know. I thought there's an interesting uh video that I sent Anne that we watched where the Trump administration was kind of making noise like it sounded like it wanted to sell off U.S. gold reserves to buy crypto for the sovereign wealth fund. And I was just thinking, like, oh my God, every like Republican
They're
and
going to
libertarian is
turn
going to lose their
gold.
mind if
They're
they
going to
do
turn
that.
actual gold into fucking Bitcoin.
That would be
That's
insane.
hilarious.
That would be
Keep in
so
mind that
bad.
the last
Talk
time
about
Trump got
looting the
involved.
treasury.
Hey, listen, the last time Trump got involved with this shit, he rug pulled his own fans, his own voters. So I'm kind of here for it. I love the Trump chaos. It's so funny sometimes.
It's one of the reasons why I think the American economy is so successful is because there is some insulation from politics. And this is just, oh man, the intertwining of politics and the economy. Even in the example of the business owner, right? I mean, you can't fully escape government. There are permits, all kinds of different places where the government gets involved, right? This is like that times 1,000.
Mm-hmm.
This is just unbelievable amount
Dutch,
of government intervention. The concentration of power is so insane to me, but whatever.
yeah, it would be very strange.
I don't think he
Uh,
understood the analogy of, and he kept defaulting back to the number of people who are authoritarians, which is completely unimportant because the authoritarians are the ones that have the fucking balls to seize power, and the people like Econoboy stand aside. They just get out of the way. So you don't have to have 80% of the people being authoritarians. You can have 5% of the people being authoritarians, and you're still going to be down that violent path.
right. And that was kind of, I mean, that was the point I was trying to get at with the whole, if he
Yeah,
agrees
it wasn't sinking in though.
that that if he agrees that wokeness was a minority opinion, and yet it completely had such hold over the public, I don't understand why and it was all the leftists and socialists that were pushing the woke stuff. I don't understand why he thinks this would be any different.
I tried to get at it with the ethno nationalism, and it still wasn't sinking in. So
Yeah. Dutch from Red Dead for $2 says, Dev, will you please wish Addie a happy birthday?
Who?
Is ADE? Aid? Addie?
Well.
Aid, Addie, happy birthday.
And then there
Come
was
on,
one.
give it a little bit more zest than
Happy
that.
birthday
Okay.
to you.
There you go. You have to do the whole song. All right, thank you. So there you go. Clark Kent for $20. Let me read the $20 and up super chats. Thank you so much. Says, what will happen? What is about to happen? This is before the conversation. Sitch will ask good questions. Adam will crash out. Econo Boy will be outed as a commie. Dev will crash out and say no one understands. Like your favorite record, it's always the same.
That was all true, pretty much.
There you go.
I mean, I try to keep my crashing out to a minimum, but
yeah, you upfronted it, and then for the rest of it, you were totally chill. So there you go.
well, look, I tried to. This is why Sitch and I were arguing before the stream about the 2v1 situation, and Sitch was like, "Nobody gives a fuck. Just speak whenever you want." And I thought,
yeah,
I'm gonna punch him in the face, and you just can't. You can't do that.
Well, I didn't know that's what you meant.
You can't have that level of intensity and then be 2v1ing somebody. So
okay.
yeah.
Joe the Mig for $20. Thank you. Says, do not let Econoboy use Norway as an example. Norway's public utilities, particularly oil production, operates as a capitalist entity with boards made up primarily of civilians whose entire focus is profitability. Yeah, and he has a weird. I mean, what he's suggesting is it is some flavor of socialism. It's just not the type of socialism that like the majority of socialists would advocate for. And also, I think from the numbers perspective, what he's advocating for, I don't even understand if it's mathematically possible through the many things that we've already just talked about. Like, how could a government really own 80% of a company, and wouldn't that just change all the incentives of the entire market system? And it's kind of hard to anticipate all the weird changes that would occur in some system like that.
I do know that his views are kind of something like, if the government owns something, that whatever it is has been socialized, and so it's socialist. So like you can, how much of your economy is government owned, and you can put a percent on how like you're 40% socialist, 60%
that was a good
capitalist.
question, Dev.
Something like that.
Yeah. asking him the exact percentage, because obviously America has some socialist institutions or collectivized, not really socialist, but collectivized industries.
Yeah, he just views government ownership as being socialist. So the more government ownership you have, the more socialist you are. That's
Sure.
kind of that's what he's using it as. Yeah.
I mean, I don't agree with that system. I would, I, I wish if the entire socialist left right now had that system, I wouldn't like it, but I wouldn't be like as worried as I am about the socialist left at the moment. Because that's not really this. They're advocating for something far worse. So
And you know what? I do think he's at least being honest about it. Like there's lots of people in the chat who are like, "Oh, he's a subversive. He's like a crypto tanky." I don't think he is. I really don't think he is. Um, I remember in the WIC debate
but
on
do
this
you think
exact
he's a
topic.
useful idiot?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Unfortunately. Well, I like him as a person, man. I just think that
That's
like
fine.
I,
But
I think that he wants to use the socialist label for something that whether or not you want to call it socialist doesn't matter because other bad people will sneak in behind him. That's
right,
gonna
right.
definitely gonna happen.
No, because yeah, I agree. I don't think he's a crypto tank either, but I do think he's a useful idiot. Or I don't know if there's a nicer way to say that. I think he's a useful idiot for all this stuff. So
Dev, click on the. Oh, you did click on the watch together.
Yep,
Sitch,
I'm in here.
bring your watch together up. Come on,
Okay, well, just real quick though,
this
what I
could
was
be
basically
comedy gold.
what I
We
was
have-
basically going to say is when I talked to him on
Nobody
Wix
cares what you
about
were gonna
this,
say, Dev.
it's
Come
like
on.
15 seconds. I'd be done by
I
now.
care.
Okay.
So when I was talking to him on Wix, I pointed out that like, hey, you know that people on the left tend to absolutely hate it when you say that the Nazis had socialist policies by this very definition you're using. They usually soy out and scream that fascism is capitalism and decay. But Econoboy just he was like, yeah, we could in fact call the Nazis socialist by my definition. They were just bad ones, and I'm going to be a good one. And it's like, well, okay, at least you bit the bullet.
Right.
Wow. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Sitch, are you in here?
I'm in here. I don't know. What is this clip you have?
Well,
This is his live stream after he was live streaming at the same time as us. He's still live.
Yeah,
So I
yeah,
want
yeah.
to see the mad shit he's talking about us. Come
What if it's all nice?
on. Okay, you want to make a bet? You want to put some
No.
money on this?
I don't want to make any bets.
well. And then there was one, guys. Also, I must have got rated at some point, but I don't think I got a notification for who rated me. So thanks to whoever did that, I guess, streaming to almost 200 viewers at some point, that's pretty based. It was by Hutch. Okay, thank you so much, Hutch. Thank you so much, Father, as I should say. Being respectful. As you can see, I'm a little splotchy. It's been a long conversation. Start, live, and learn World War II. I don't know what that means, KW. Patience of a God. Yeah, it was getting testy there for a second, but I thought I did at least a decent job staying calm.
I mean, I thought he was more testy than me, Sitch, but I'll let you be the judge. What do you think?
As I said, you front loaded all your testiness in the beginning, and then we're pretty chill.
Yeah, but he got way testier.
He was testy
towards the end. Yeah.
Yeah, throughout.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I don't know why, but
As soon as I showed up, he chilled out. But before that, you guys were sparking.
yes.
Lots of ad hom insults.
Well,
but-
he does this thing that annoys me, which is that like I'll say like it kind of the same thing with the sovereign wealth. Like I do feel like there's some level. I don't think it's tanky. But I do think there's some level of obfuscation, like using the sovereign wealth fund or these other things as examples, because like you're using. It's like someone saying, you should drink water because water is good for you. And everyone's like, yeah, we all agree with that. And it's like, okay, you should drink 20 gallons of water every day.
Right.
And you're like, wait a minute.
That's not
like,
good
that's
for you.
too much water. That's going to kill you. And you're like, whoa, water is good for you. And it's like, wait a minute. like, obviously we're talking about, the amount that we're talking about in this conversation. It's kind of the same thing with the sovereign wealth fund. There's a very big difference between Norway's sovereign wealth fund, which I mean, I'm unfamiliar with the one that owns the companies within Norway, but the one that owns a bunch of, stock in private companies in other countries. I mean, that's very different than the government owning 80% of the wealth a country generates.
Yeah. I looked it up. 42% of Norway's wealth is in the homes that the Norwegians own. And 80% of those homes are privately owned. So
Well, also
I guess
under
that's
this,
20% renters.
I mean, under his system, would now we have
Would the
private
government
for
own
the?
those homes? I
No,
don't
I mean
know.
like, so if the U.S. government owns 80% of stock, does that mean that U.S. citizens and foreign governments now have to compete for the 20%? The foreign governments would obviously be able to outbid individual people. So people would have no, how would anyone invest in anything
Yeah,
in this
and wouldn't
system?
the government have the ability to just set the stock price
Essentially.
since they're the only ones holding the stock, able to buy and sell at will? They could definitely crater the stock if they wanted to.
When also as I think, if most companies, I don't think would ever sell out majority to the government anyway. So I don't even think it'd be possible for the government to own 80% of the entire
Right.
market anyway, unless they forcibly just passed a law that mandated that they did it, which they very well might do if that's kind of the way the incentives line up.
How do you guys think I did? Did you think, did I do you proud, chat? Chat, was I a good socialist? And then it's like, no, actually, you were among the best. That's my goal, really. I want to be the meme where the Grim Reaper says, no, I'm told you were the best socialist. That's really what I'm hoping for. Are you ready for your Destiny debate? Easy money, I was born ready, okay? Born ready. Destiny is not nearly the caliber of debater as I am, okay? That's why I've made millions of dollars debating people on the internet, and he hasn't. Kano, I am a democratic socialist and have always considered myself such. Why do you take politics like a joke? Raymond, I don't know what you mean. I tend to take...
Okay. This is kind of boring shit.
It is, yeah. I guess we'll have to
Which is
listen,
what I
listen and report. Obviously,
Okay.
you guys will listen, and you'll be the first to send us a clip if he says any. He talks
I don't
any
care.
mad
Crazy.
shit.
Shana Boy can talk all the shit he wants. I don't
He does not
care.
seem like the kind of guy to
Right.
talk behind somebody's back, I
Um,
don't think.
Keaton Kitsune, thanks so much for $35. It says, I want to correct my last super chat. Pisco interrupted a debate panel where Vivian Wolf was getting grilled for supporting the Reinhold shooting and equating it to Rittenhouse. Her Antifa group docs list was another panel. Well, there you go.
Oh
You
my
should
god, is
read
Vivian
the-
fucking Wolf back?
I don't know. There was some super chat about that last stream.
You should read Death by Sloss also
Where
in the
is it?
DMs.
Oh,
Oh my God. Oh no, that's the
I
wrong
don't see it.
DM group.
I sent you a picture Majin made, but I don't see the Death by Sloth one.
I will
Okay.
move it to the top for you. Here you go.
Thank you.
Death by Sloth, 40 members. It's actually from the last stream, remember?
Oh,
missed
yeah,
it.
yeah.
Yeah. I told him
Right.
we would read it.
Thank you so much, Death by Sloth, for bringing a Frugal Secret for 40 months. Says socialists are so sure that socialism is guaranteed to make everyone's life better that lying about it is akin to planning a surprise birthday party.
That's funny.
That's pretty funny and kind of accurate. So,
Yes.
hey, Tally. Tally's in the chat. Barry Bruiser for $20 says 40% of the 70 million, so 28 million Trump supporters are self-described radicals, question mark. Radicals would be standing with or just next to Nick Fuentes. Find me 28 million Americans who have softened yet empathetic criticisms for people like him. Yes.
Mm.
I guess that's what you were getting at, Adam, when you were asking those questions. Mark Twain's Revenge for $20. Oh, no, I read that one already. Yeah, so there's a lot of questions that we didn't get to for Econoboy, but that's just the way it goes. Sorry about that. We didn't want to keep them for a million more hours. Also, Yar for 20 Aussie bucks says, just got here, get Hutch on instead. Well, I mean, we'd have a completely different conversation with Hutch because Hutch obviously would agree about the whole not aligning with socialist. So,
I mean, I'm gonna assume that there's no super chats from me since I'm not the focus of this.
you
but
can
are there any?
dip out if you want.
Yeah, take care.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming on, Dev.
Do you see any before I go?
Uh,
with Dev in them?
let's see.
Well, if someone paid you for a question for me, I'll answer it, but I don't think there's gonna be any this time.
Here we go. It says, Dev sucks for $100. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Oh, okay.
Fair
Gotcha.
Practical Progress for 2 Aussie bucks says Dev is good at amicably extracting answers. That is true. That is very true.
Oh, thank you very much.
That's very true.
Calling in the good cop.
Dev is a good cop, usually. Yeah.
I mean, I've found that like if you do genuinely understand what they're trying to say, then you can engage with them on their terms, which means you don't have to do the dance about like, oh, what does this word mean? What does that word mean? Just accept all the semantic arguments, and then be like, okay, here's where the actual problem of substance is, and you can kind of drill down to that really quickly, in my experience.
Were you frustrated with the more freedom conversation when Sitch kept saying like, "Oh yeah, see the 75%, yes, they have more freedom, but the 25%, they're getting fucked."
Yeah, and he mentioned something along the lines of if you implement his system and people get, 20 times more rich, but they don't have the freedom to open a business anymore. And his
Mhm.
argument is something like, well, the extra access to that all that wealth will grant you other freedoms because now you can do more things with that money. And maybe the freedom that you gain from having that money will offset the freedom you've lost from starting the business. And that's true on some level. I understand his argument. Um, but his
It's a
argument basically
huge this
it
would interfere with creative destruction, obviously, because there are a lot
it
of
would,
people
yeah.
that want to use that wealth to start a business.
Yeah, that's true. But I mean, it also it boils down to the idea of golden chains, right? Like, would you rather be,
Yes, of
provided for and
course.
cared for, but you actually can't make choices in your life, or would you rather be poor, but you can choose to do you can choose to do what you want with whatever little amount that you actually have? And I do think there's probably going to be personality differences in that, right? Like some people
Of
will just be like, you know
course.
what? I would rather have absolutely no free will, but just have all of my material needs provided for. Some people will take that. Will take that. Others will be like, no, 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 no. I'll be poor, but I want the freedom to choose what I do with my time. And those are two very different lifestyles, two very different personality types that will choose those two things. And they're both in a different way. They're both freeing, you know? So,
Yeah. Well, just to me, just framing saying that if we reappropriate people's wealth and give it to other people, that those people are more free. I mean, I know, listen, I don't think it's a tanky, but you're really making it very easy for your system to be subverted by the tanky. That's like the equivalent of a girl dressing up in like a mini skirt and a very, very low cut top, and she's got $100 bills, falling out of her pocket and walking in a very, high crime area. It's kind of like, oh, we're we're getting to you're basically asking for it at that point.
oh my God, Sitch says she asked for it. What was she
Yes,
wearing?
exactly.
Oh,
Exactly.
okay. Yeah, I think one of the last times I was on here, we talked about American libertarianism and why it was so right wing compared to European libertarianism, which is more left wing. And I
Hmm.
think the idea is that because America, after all the natives were dead, America was like this empty continent, and all sorts of people could like arrive on America's shores and run off into the wilderness and kind of,
Right.
escape the state and build whatever society they wanted to build. And so you kind of develop this notion of freedom as being freedom is something where you are away from restrictive institutions. But in Europe, because they had no room to run off, there was no wilderness to run off into. In Europe, freedom became institutions providing things for you so that you could then take those resources and do something with them.
That's a
And I mean,
great point. Yeah.
I think those are both there's reasons to value both of those things, I think.
Yes. But he kind of was from
Oh,
Texas. What the fuck? You should have an American ideal of freedom. What the hell?
Sammy just asked if I'm going to the gym. I worked out this morning, Sammy, but thank you.
Look at that. Barry Bruiser for $2 says Dev is gay. There you go, Dev. Heart.
Nice, thank you. Thank
You're
you.
Ray for $5 says Suffer, Dev. Suffer. Trump owns your mind and in the end, your
True.
life as well.
True. Dev, when are you going to free your mind?
Sorry, I can never be pro Trump. Sorry.
I'm not asking you to
It's
be pro
it's
Trump.
too
You
far.
just got to leave the TDS behind. That's it.
Listen, every day Adam's becoming more and more anti-Trump, I think.
Listen, I do not have Trump dick rider syndrome.
That's true. That's true. But well, I guess we'll see because we had the last time he came on, we had this conversation about how far could Trump pull his base? Like, what could he
Hmm.
do where they say too far? And it looks, we'll see. I'm curious. We'll see how all the Epstein stuff plays out because that is sort of a good
That's
test. And
true. He is in fact losing some support among like the really diehards.
yes,
I've
yes. So
noticed
we'll
that. Yeah,
see.
fair enough. Fair enough.
Right, right.
All it took was him being accused of being, credibly being accused of being a pedophile for him to
Well,
lose support.
covering up.
Holy fuck.
I thought that he might have fired the stats person, the job stats person, to change the story from Epstein.
Oh, really?
And I
Okay,
was
yeah.
thinking,
Really?
oh, that's too, I'm being too cynical here. And
I don't know. That's what what's his face said. What's the guy that
Scaramucci, yeah.
Scaramucci said that?
And then I heard Scaramucci say it, and I was like, oh well, fuck. Maybe he
And
did.
Scaramucci knows Trump personally, so
Yeah,
I don't know.
he wants to turn the page on the Epstein stuff. And I did listen to an interview with the woman you were talking about who said
Yeah, she just
was
gave another
dating
interview
Epstein.
like
Yeah,
yesterday.
yeah, I
Yeah.
saw it. She was dating Epstein, and Epstein took her to Trump's office thinking that Trump would try something and she would fight back against him, and Trump did try something and she didn't do anything. She just basically was like,
She froze.
grope me.
Which is it's weird because on one
Grab him by
hand,
the pussy.
yeah, because on
And they
one
let
hand,
you. That's what he's talking about. He's talking about this this situation.
well, it's that interaction. Yeah, for those who didn't listen, it's very interesting. There's this woman who says that she was dating Epstein, or actually, well, you can go, Deb, if you need to go, but this is going.
I'll stay for this final
Okay.
convo. I don't mind.
I know it's bashing Trump, so you're happy.
Yes,
Yeah,
based.
yeah,
Let's do it.
fuck.
But no, this woman was saying that she dated Epstein for like 6 months or something, and that she had this interaction. Well, first of all, she said that Epstein talked about Trump all the time, which is kind of
Constantly.
interesting.
Yeah.
And that was like the only friend of his that he would talk about. So she's saying they were very close. But that they had this interaction where he took her up to see Trump in Trump's office, and Trump is like roping the crap out of her, like grabbing her tits and her ass and everything. And during that like when he's doing that, like Epstein is not angry about it. He's not interacting. They're just talking. He's talking with Trump normally about like her career. She was a model at the time and everything. And then after that, when they leave, Epstein was like furious and very angry at her because he wanted her to like fight back against Trump. And apparently she had a reputation of fighting back against, because she was a model, and a lot of the photographers in the modeling industry would try to, always try to try shit, apparently, according to her, and she would have a reputation for not taking that shit. And it's a weird story because on one hand you'd say, okay, well, if the accusation is that Epstein and Trump like shared a girlfriend or something, why would he take a girl up there with the purpose of having her like blow up on Trump and get mad that she didn't? But then on the other hand, why would Trump think it was acceptable to start groping a girl that he thinks is this guy, his friend's girlfriend, like in front of him?
Yeah,
So I don't,
to fuck with him.
I don't know. Like, I don't really know how to interpret that story. It's such a
Very weird
bizarre
story, isn't it?
interaction.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very weird story. So
I'm not sure we know the relationship between Trump and Jeffrey Epstein. They could have been both people who wanted to become famous, and were both trying to become famous in different ways. So they really were frenemies. They had this competitive thing going between them.
They were the same person, actually.
No.
They're secretly the same person. Trump was just changing like out of the costume constantly.
There you go.
People have been saying now that Trump killed Epstein, that Epstein was worried Trump was going to kill him, and that perhaps Trump had a hand in killing him.
There was one article where like someone was examining the security footage outside of Epstein's door before it went out, and someone
Donald
was like,
Trump was there.
someone said like a strange orange figure like descended from like the top of the stairs.
Jumpsuit.
A strange orange figure descends, and then the
Oh
camera
my
cuts
God.
out.
You're right.
And it's like it
See,
was
that's
Trump.
the problem. In the video, you see like a little orange, you see a pixel of orange like ascend the stairs. And we assume it was the jumpsuit, but it wasn't.
It was Trump.
It was Trump. It's a perfect disguise.
Coming to finish the job.
Exactly. The real Hulsenator for $20 says tag Dev in, please.
Oh, hi, I'm here.
They
okay,
got
here,
your
real
wish.
quick. So, Epstein, there's in my opinion, there's two possibilities here. One is the one that everyone's running with, is that Trump's in the files. Two, this is the one that is more boring, but I think probably slightly more likely, is that there's actually nothing in the files at all. And basically Trump doesn't want to release them because it would basically mean he loses all of the support from all of the crazy conspiratoids.
I don't that can't possibly be true because if it would be the way he would handle that would be very different. He would say, I'm president. They wiped the files. Joe Biden wiped the files. He would just say this. Joe Biden wiped the files for the 4 years president, and I'm reopening the investigation and we're at the bottom of it.
Maybe it's possible, but yeah, I would love it if the meme is true, but usually, I'm kind of in the nothing ever happens camp at this point. Usually the memes aren't true. Usually the crazy stories end up being false. It's usually just something really boring.
Well, I
So-
don't. I think the most likely scenario is I don't think Trump was a pedo or anything. But I do think he knew what was going on with Epstein, whether it was just Epstein was doing it for himself or doing it for blackmail. I do think he was aware of Epstein doing it. He made that weird comment that everyone's talked about where he likes him young. And I do think Trump probably was sharing girls or doing weird, lewd shit with 18-year-olds or higher with Epstein. And he just knows that if that gets out, it's going to look so bad for him that people will automatically assume he's a pedo. And that's why he wants this to just go away.
Listen, it's not pedophile, Sitch. It's ephibophile.
Oh, excuse me. Excuse me.
The fact that you
Hemophile
know
or
that, Dev, is
whatever.
very disturbing. Just so you,
There's just like
the
three.
the
I don't know.
fact
There's
that
like
you're
another
making
one.
that
I don't-
distinction
Yeah,
is.
there's three of them. Yeah, there's three of them. I don't know the third
Yeah.
one either. I have to go look it up.
Oh, look,
Anyway.
now he's like, but I don't know. Thank God.
I don't. You just see here.
Listen, Deswall specifically for TR says, I'm at the gym. Where you at, Dev?
God damn it.
Oh,
Meme
someone's
spread for $5.
paging you at
Meme
the
spread for
gym.
$5 says, while Dev is here, I'm happy to see him posting videos again. I never became a Dev hater. I just think his take on Ruby Ridge is horrible.
Well, thanks very much, man. Yeah, I mean, people thought for a while that it was like all the drama that was keeping me offline. No, it was real life stuff. It was IRL
Right.
stuff happening. But I'm back.
Right.
I'm
That's
finally
good.
back.
I always like Dev videos.
Thank you. I can't find the third one. Fuck.
Don't worry about it. No one cares. It's actually better if you don't know it, because if you do know it, people assume some bad things about you.
Oh man, dude, hold on. That's actually the best way to cover your tracks as a real pedophile. Is just pretend you don't know.
Dev
just say
keeps digging. He's
You
like,
just say, no,
give me that
you just-
fucking shovel.
You just say, I don't know the other two. I don't know.
Exactly. There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. There you go.
I'm gonna take off though, guys. I'll see you
Okay.
later.
Take
Thanks for
care.
having me on.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Get out of here, punk.